again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. We thank you very much for your time and for joining us in what promises to be a very interesting and exciting conversation with Rabbi Ammiel Hirsch, the senior rabbi at Stephen Wise Free Synagogue in New York City, who joins us again about a year after he was here last year to talk about a conference called Recharging Reform Judaism. It is having its second iteration coming up at the end of May, May 29th and 30th in New York City. And as Ami and I were talking before we started this, a year ago there was one Jewish reality, and now there's another Jewish reality. And we want to talk a little bit about that and the implication. This podcast really finishes up a little series of podcasts that we've done, not necessarily specifically focused on the impact of longevity revolution, which is our usually bailiwick, but follows up a series of conversations on Jewish genetic diseases, reproductive rights, and the issue of responsa in liberal Judaism. So we're taking a little bit of a off the beaten path, but really it's the same path, a variety of different on-ramps. Ami, welcome. Welcome to Seekers of Meaning. I hope you're well. You've just gotten back from another trip to Israel. Is that correct?
Rabbi Address, first of all, it's good to be here. Thank you for asking me to come on again. And you're still looking good. Yes, I don't think you've changed since the last time we spoke in this forum.
Okay. Hirsch, I'll talk to you later.
Listen, at our age, that means a lot.
It means, listen, listen, thank you very much for doing this. I know you're overwhelmed. You've just gotten back, the holiday and the conference. First of all, your reaction, is this your second or third trip back to Israel since October 7th?
It's very interesting. It's the second trip. The first trip was with a group of 12 early career rabbis who are our rabbinic fellows. They're the Amplify Israel Rabbinic Fellows. You might recall that at last year's conference, we announced that we were launching this. And we even asked colleagues that if they had names of people they thought they wanted to recommend, they should send it to us. We got 3 times as many names of people who we could afford to accept on this fully funded year-long fellowship. By the way, I would just add parenthetically that the program has been so successful, and the funders, the donors, have been so delighted, even though we're only halfway through, that they have asked us to triple the program. I don't think we're going to be able to triple it, but what I do think we're going to be able to do is at least double the program. They are intimating that they will double the amount of support, financial support. So this is really, really good, because one of the key objectives that we had with Amplify Israel and with the Recharging conference and the Recharging initiative is to influence the movement short-term, mid-term, and long-term from the inside, and eventually to train and educate and create a setting for early career rabbis who still have decades of their career ahead of them to be able to voice their views, which I consider to be mainstream Reform Jews, that is, the centrality of Jewish peoplehood and Zionism, as opposed to an increasingly intense opposition to that from within our movement, both on the lay and congregational structure as well as the rabbinic level. And so this program is very, very important, very influential, and I think it's been a success so far, so much so that hopefully we'll be able to double the amount of rabbinic colleagues for next year. That was the first trip. We were really the first group of people who came as a group. It was about 5 or 6 weeks after October 7th, and there was hardly anybody there. There was a small CCAR group, by the way, there as well that we ran into. And then the second mission that I just returned from was 30 congregants between two synagogues, the village temple and Rabbi Fursko, their senior rabbi, joined us. And we spent a very intensive week, a very difficult week, but also in some significant ways uplifting week.
So what was what's the takeaway back home now? You've just gotten back. It's different, I would imagine, from now, from when you were there right after October 7th. What's your impression? What's your takeaway?
Well, it's hard to say. On the one, we stayed in Tel Aviv. We unfortunately we couldn't go north. We did go south. That in and of itself is a reflection of the oddity of the situation, the surreal atmosphere in that we would normally have spent 2 days up in the north of Israel, and we didn't even think about going because it's essentially a war zone. So on the one hand, if you were to just come in not knowing anything about the current situation or the history, especially since October 7th, and you plunked yourself in Tel Aviv for a week, you would probably think that things are more or less normal. It's a big city. It's a very unique city, a free city, live and let live. The bars are packed, the concert halls, the opera, the restaurants. It's hard to get a reservation in, some of the choicest restaurants in Tel Aviv. So from that perspective, things look on the outside normal if you were to just simply walk around town. However, for those of us who know Israel well, because we've been there many times, and we have family there, we can sense that something is off, that something dramatic is off. First of all, I can go into that in detail, Richie, if you want, but fundamentally, the question of the hostages is an open, bleeding wound that simply won't close and won't heal until there is resolution of the crisis. The Israelis have indicated that they believe that at least 40 or 50 of the 133 hostages presumably left are already dead. So they're looking at something like 80 hostages. But this issue needs to be resolved, and they need to come home dead or alive, in the sense of their corpses need to come home if they're dead, and they need to be buried. And without that closure, this is going to continue to be an open and intensifying wound in Israeli society that somebody who knows Israeli society perceives that. And then, of course, people are on edge. The investigations the commissions haven't been established yet, but they need to, with much of the army and the reservist army back in civilian life, not all. And there's a very heavy obligation looking down the road. But with most of them back, people, and now that the essence, most of the IDF has withdrawn from Gaza. There's one unit still there. Increasingly, the hard political questions and the intense political dynamic is coming to the fore. That needs to happen. There cannot be recovery without political accountability. And by the way, not only political, on every level, military accountability as well, both in terms of the strategic conceptions that were catastrophically wrong, as well as the operational activity on the day itself from the IDF. So people are increasingly aware that this is around the corner and that this needs to happen, and that it hasn't happened yet is frustrating for people, and it's going to be increasingly frustrated. And the one additional thing that is putting people on edge that you feel in the air is, of course, Iran is threatening in a very, very dramatic way, and there could be a war in the north on any given day. It could erupt without the parties even wanting that to happen, but just simply stumbling into it. So you put all of this together, and while superficially on the outside, it might seem like things are essentially normal, it's not normal. And these are very difficult days for Israel and therefore for American Jewry as well.
So you in a recent interview were quoted, I think it's on E-Jewish Philanthropy, about saying that this moment now post-October 7th is consequential in Jewish history, which leads us to May 29th and 30th of this year in the second conference at the synagogue. Obviously, things have changed. What's your focus as the convener for this May as opposed to last May? What do you want to have happen in this May's conference?
That's a really good question. I would say that coming out of last year's conference, which was attended by over 300 colleagues, professional, Reformed Jewish professionals, rabbis, cantors, educators, administrators, and many, many lay leaders as well. Yeah, presidents of synagogues and members of the board of the union and of various synagogues and so on. Coming out of that, we have done and prepared a lot of activity that would continue to give momentum to what we did, including curricula development and webinars and, as I said, the Rabbinic Fellowship. But we didn't expect to do another conference, certainly not within a year. We did not anticipate, nor was it our expectation, to do an annual recharging conference. But given October 7th, and given the immense historical significance of not only that day, but the period that we're in now, and we're still in the midst in some very dramatic ways, it's still October 7th for us. And given that we have the same, if not intensifying tensions within the American Jewish community, within liberal American Jewry, which is the vast majority of American Jews, and within the Reform movement itself. And given that we did not see these kind of conventions, certainly not within our movement, that devoted the days entirely to October 7th and the aftermath, either, from the CCAR or the URJ, although there were some conventions in the meantime that devoted some time to that. We felt that there would be an interest and even a need to convene for 2 days, and New York is a central place, to explore all of the ramifications. The focus is still on us, the Reform movement. It's about recharging Reform Judaism. That said, the program will have a broader cross-section of American Jewry. So, for example, Jonathan Greenblatt will be with us from the ADL. Rabbi Opie will be with us since he spent the year at Harvard. So we'll be able to bring many more voices representing the spectrum of American and world Jewry to the table on May 29th and 30th. And to the best of my understanding, and I observe this closely, in this broad way and in this kind of intense 2-day gathering, I don't think that's been done yet since October 7th.
So let's get somebody maybe watching this, listening to this, colleague. How do they register? What's the website that wants some information?
There's a website called Recharging Reform, and you just, if you want to Google it, you can Google it. Otherwise, you just punch in Recharging Reform, and it'll take you through the registration process. You can also do it, of course, through the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue website. But the Recharging Conference is not actually part of the Stephen Wise Amplify program. It stands separately because we want to be able to create a presence inside the Reform movement that's comprised of all of the many hundreds of people who are helping us create this kind of initiative and this culture in the URJ, in the American Reform movement. No, I should say the North American Reform movement, Because,
North
of course, we
America,
include the
North America.
Canadians as well.
Right. And Mr. Anshin would probably be concerned if you left Canada out. You alluded to before, and you in interviews and stuff, and we mentioned this, you alluded to this actually from the keynote last year, but it's even more present. This universalism versus particularism division. In one of the interviews, you said this is like we're going, quote, back to the future, and some sort of a return from the original 19th century American reform approach to Israel. Unpack that on me, because I think that's really, really, really important. And I would sense that it would probably be an even more important part of this year's conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, I agree. And we can see additional examples of that post-October 7th. It baffled me for most of my career. I was the executive director of ARTSA for 12 years early in my career, 3 years after I was ordained, and I did that for 12 years. And
that's the, just make sure people know, ARTSA is
it's the Association of Reform Zionists of America. It's changed its structure now within the URJ, but at the time it was an independent affiliate with a big board of 150 trustees from around the country. We raised our own funds. We supported institutions in Israel and so on and so forth. So it was not a department of the URJ. It required a full-blown effort to instill Zionist ideology and Zionist values in the reform movement on every level, on the reform professional level, the lay leadership level, as well as the congregational level, the Jew in the pew. And I spent all of my time doing that and trying to raise money, and we ran elections for the World Zionist Congress. And I kept on encountering this phenomenon of either apathy or a coolness that was not so much on the rabbinic level, but was definitely on the lay level of the URJ board and within congregations. I remember that. I didn't pay too much attention to that because this was in the 1990s. I was there from 1992 to 2004. And my assumption was, there are lots of other things that the North American reform movement is doing, and certain things give people different kicks, and Israel gives a certain group of people, and but there was no kind of antagonism to Israel or alienation from Israel. And I'm not sure I fully, looking back on that, I'm not sure I fully appreciated the inherent personality and characteristics of the liberal American Jew. And in here, I don't necessarily include Canada because I'm not an expert on Reform Jewry in Canada, but it's definitely something that I saw in the United States. And it's much more vivid to me in retrospect. That is, why was it the case that our movement for its first 50 years or so was so vehemently anti-Zionist? After all, it is a millennial-old dream of Jews and Judaism to return to the land of Israel. And one of the key pillars of Judaism from any perspective is the centrality of the land of Israel to Jewish civilization. And the reason was, and this was very clear, and to their credit, what we now call the classical Reform Zionists, their classical Reform rabbis, were very clear on why they were anti-Zionists, and they were very clear on what they believed. And they had very strong beliefs, to their credit. Fundamentally, they believed that Jewish particularism, the concept of Jewish peoplehood, was passé. It was no longer relevant. It was a lower form of social and religious evolution to the kind of Kantian universalism that was pervasive in the 19th and 20th century, and that Jewish particularism, especially in the form of political nationalism, was actually an impediment to the achievements and the aspirations of Western Enlightenment, which was conflated in Reform Judaism with a sense of messianic values, prophetic messianic values. And so, therefore, the statement that seemed to me incredulous when I began studying it in the late 20th century, but the statement that they would commonly in resolutions, rabbinic sermons, HUC faculty, the statement, America is our Zion, was more than just a flippant slogan. They actually meant it. They meant that we no longer consider ourselves a nation, but a religious community. Jewish peoplehood is no longer relevant to us, and therefore any manifestation of Jewish peoplehood, especially the political movement to return the Jewish people to Zion, and Jewish peoplehood in Herzl's thinking was at the center of it, albeit from a secular perspective. But nonetheless, you read the Jewish state and you see that Herzl writes almost as a self-revelation, we are a people, one people. So naturally, the Reform movement was going to reject that when it was proposed, and it was especially difficult for them because the early Zionist movement was kind of a rebellious against religion to begin with. And that was the case for 50 years. And the assumption was that what is the solution to the Jewish problem? What the classical Reform Jews believed, and what liberals still believe, is the age of reason will solve the unreasonableness of anti-Semitism. Because in the end, anti-Semitism is grounded and rooted in unreason. It's unreasonable. So what is the solution? The age of reason. We simply need to reason with people, educate people, explain to them why this is unreasonable, and the problem, if not, it will be completely solved. It will be manageable. The Zionists thought exactly the opposite. The Zionists thought, since anti-Semitism is unreasonable, there is no way that we are going to reason somebody into something they didn't reason themselves into in the first place. So they said, we have to get out of the way. And that's how they came to embrace a concept of self-determination in an environment where lots of nationalities were claiming the right to self-determination. So now, for years, I thought that up until and then after the Holocaust, the dimensions of the Holocaust, it's not that anybody could predict the dimensions of the Holocaust. Nobody should hold anybody to account that they didn't predict the Holocaust. Who could have imagined anything like that? But in retrospect, the Zionists were more right in their historical understanding of how the nations will address their Jews than the classical Reform movement, because at the very least, Western Enlightenment's promises to the Jews were inflated. And in reality, they were shattered. Germany was the most advanced liberal society in the world, in the history of the world. So for all those years, I thought that we had overcome this period in our lives and in the development of our movement historically, because even though it's not right to blame us for not predicting the Holocaust happened, and it was very clear that the age of reason could not solve the problem of anti-Semitism. And so with the creation of the State of Israel, and then with the understanding of what actually happened during the Holocaust, and then for sure after the Six-Day War, my assumption, even when I was at ARTSA, was this era had passed. And it took me most of my career but in the last 7-10 years or so, I have become increasingly convinced that actually this anti-peoplehood, anti-Zionist philosophy is the default position of diaspora liberal Judaism.
At least in America, at least in the United States.
Because what you have now is what I think in retrospect unfolded in most of the 20th century is existential threat after existential threat against the Jewish people, beginning with the pogroms in Eastern Europe in the early part of the 20th century, with the rise of fascism, the Nazi rule, the dimensions of the Holocaust, the creation of the State of Israel, which hung by a thread, the Six-Day War, which also most American Jews felt was the demise of the remnant of the Jewish people, the 73 War, and to a certain degree, the struggle for Soviet Jewry. All of these crises were perceived by world Jewry as existential crises, and these compelled, forced all of us, including those of us who started out anti-peoplehood, anti-Zionist, into the Zionist embrace and into the peoplehood fold. But now, there have been 2 generations of Jews who have grown up mostly with under center and center-right governments in Israel. Now there's an element of extreme messianism in the coalition. They observe the Middle East. They don't know all that much, but what they do know and what their impressions are is that Israel is not under existential threat. They do not believe they are under any existential threat, the rise of anti-Semitism in this country notwithstanding. And if anything, they look at Israel as a regional superpower, and in many respects, a neighborhood bully. That is, from their perspective, exercising military force improperly and unethically and immorally. And so what is happening is that the old liberal position is being restored, at least in these younger generations, that they consider the expression of Jewish particularism to be a less developed form of religion and social evolution than universalism. That's why they emphasize Tikkun Olam. They understand and interpret Tikkun Olam not as a blend of Jewish particularism and Jewish universalism, not as the prophets intended. After all, prophetic values were anchored in Jewish peoplehood. All of the Hebrew prophets, every last one of them, were of the people, by the people, and for the people. They weren't anti-peoplehood. They prophesied that if you live moral lives, the people will be restored. But from their perspective, they emphasize Tikkun Olam not as an expression of Jewish peoplehood in our zeal to try and repair and perfect the world. They look at it at the expense of Jewish peoplehood, and that is and was the position of the classical reformers in the 19th and early 20th century.
So given this dichotomy and the tension, and I think that's a good word, this tension that exists as you're reporting it, and as many of our colleagues and lay leaders have also reported, one of the tenets of the upcoming conversation at the end of May, I think really grew out of a conversation last May, and that is a significant concern about our young people, our high school students, and our college students who walk into Penn or Temple or Stanford or Michigan or Brandeis or here again last recently Haverford College, and are totally unprepared Jewishly. They're biologically Jewish. They may have been bar bat mitzvah. They may have been confirmed, and they're met with demonstrations. This one young lady from Wisconsin that did a podcast for us a couple of months ago, very activist, said, I go to class and sometimes it's not that I'm afraid for my life, but it is unnerving and it's somewhat scary to walk across the campus in Madison and be confronted with, I'm a baby killer, from this sea to the river, whatever. How are we going to address that issue in May?
Well, we're going to put a lot of focus on it. And it starts, I think, with the self-recognition that we did something wrong. We, whatever it is we thought we were teaching, we did not, one, teach enough. Now, that's not entirely our fault because we can only implant the Jewish substance in young people who give us the opportunity to do that. If the parents send their kids to us once a week for, and then even that is problematic for them because they've got all kinds of other extracurricular activities. It's very hard, in particular if they're not getting that kind of Jewish substance at home. And remember, when I say Jewish substance, I mean not only knowledge, which is also important for identity formation, but an emotional understanding of who we are. Who do we belong to? And we have not done a good enough job in conveying that, because if you grow up with a very solid understanding of who you are and your obligations to fellow Jews, you might still be intimidated and, be positioned in a way that puts you at a disadvantage in college because you don't know enough. And after all, the Palestinian activists, the pro-Palestinian activists, that's actually not the best terminology because in certain ways I consider myself pro-Palestinian too, but I think we know what we mean. They're anti-Zionists and anti-Israel is what they're confronting over there. And they are at a disadvantage because those people are very knowledgeable. Some of them have been placed there in order to lobby and protest and advocate. Some of them are there studying, but they have firsthand experience. They're highly, highly funded, many of them. And so, our young people who are no shrinking violets when it comes to academic achievements, they're able to grasp the material. They just haven't, and they're placed at a certain disadvantage. But even then, if we had successfully implanted in them the deepest loyalty, the Jewish peoplehood, and to the family of the Jews worldwide, and therefore, of course, to the Jewish state, they would realize that this is corrupt, this is warped. These are people who are not on our side. They have problematic views not only about Israel, but it is anti-Semitic adjacent. But to the extent that they don't, or they're just completely overwhelmed, it's a testament to the failure of our education, and we need to discuss as a movement how we're going to change that. We have various venues in which we can change it. First of all, in the home, and we do have the possibility of influencing parents and making them more comfortable with Jewish rituals and Jewish expressions at home. That, of course, at the end of the day, is the best possible setting for instilling Jewish identity. For sure in the synagogue, and we have to emphasize different things. We have to realize that in our zeal to convey Judaism's concern for humanity at large, we forgot to emphasize that it all starts with an affinity with the Jewish people. And then, of course, our camps are very, very important. And we need to have a thorough evaluation and reevaluation what's going on in camps in particular in the aftermath of October 7th. And then, of course, if you neglect all of this, by the time a young adult gets to university, it's probably too late for many of them. But still, we need to invest considerably more resources and sophistication on the university level as well.
So, Ami, something else that was alluded to last year, and I've had this conversation with several of my colleagues, informally, and that is, I'm not necessarily talking about our seminary, but there's this plethora of non-Orthodox seminaries from a variety of different stripes. I mean, here in Philly, we have the Reconstructionists, we have the Olive Seminary, you got Boston Hebrew, you got the Academy, you got the places on the West Coast. And given the tension that you're talking about, are you concerned that we're some of the younger college people who are coming into seminaries don't fully grasp this reality of this tension that you're talking about?
Of course, I think that's a major crisis. I hope, but I'm not convinced that the leadership of our movement is aware of that. Because as I mentioned last year at the conference, and I believe this to be even more acute now, post-October 7th. When I say post-October 7th, we're looking at years of this kind of crisis in the Jewish community. I'm not convinced that our leadership recognizes the intensity of the challenge, because if so, we would not be creating a process by the end of which we are ordaining or graduating Jewish professional leaders who are anti-Zionists. How could that be? We're a Zionist movement. It bears repeating over and over again. We are a Zionist movement. There is nobody in leadership. There is no resolution in any body of the Union for Reform Judaism or any of the other bodies of the Reform movement. There is nothing that no initiative that indicates anything other than what I just said. We are a Zionist movement. We've resolved this over and over again. We have a campus in Jerusalem. The first-year students spend a year there. So how and in particular, when Zionism is under so much pressure, internally for sure from the Jewish community, but externally from so many enemies, not only critics. I distinguish between legitimate criticism and hatred of Israel that leads to the desire to want to destroy Israel. Okay, and anti-Zionism is the theory that the Jewish state has no right to exist. How is it possible that there is any American reform institution that accepts an outcome of graduating a leader of American or North American Reform Judaism who is an anti-Zionist? It's inconceivable. And so I'm not sure that our leadership throughout all of our bodies, CCAR, the URJ, the HUC, and the synagogue world, I'm not sure that we are all acutely focused on the dimensions of this crisis as we need to be. And this is a crisis that will be long-lasting. It requires of us to step back, reassess, evaluate what we've done well in the last decade, what we could have done better, and to take action. If there are no actions resulting from October 7th, then it's almost guaranteed that we're not learning the lessons well enough.
How optimistic are you?
About Israel, I'm very optimistic. I think we're going to go through a very, very difficult period. I hope that the political reckoning and the military reckoning will eventually make Israel a stronger society. I hope it'll be more unified. And I hope the outcome of this war, big wars often bring in big historical changes. And I hope that that's the case. I hope that there are new diplomatic openings in the aftermath of this terrible war, and a greater awareness in Israel of what's at stake, and avoiding the kind of catastrophic breakdowns, both in conception as well as in execution, that occurred on October 7th. With respect to American Jewry, I think at the end of the day, the main challenge for us is what I've always felt it was going to be, which is not so much Israel-diaspora relations, but Jewish continuity. And right now, when we look at are we creating enough Jewish identity in this generation of young American Jews so as to be confident that when it comes their time to pass Judaism on to their posterity, they will do so and want to do so. I don't think there's we should be confident that that's happening in the numbers that we need to sustain American Jewish life. That always was the primary challenge. That is going to remain the primary challenge. The issue of Israel-diaspora relations is, in the end, I believe that this is one of the reasons why I think the stakes are so high for us in the reform movement. In the end, Israel is going to, in my view, survive and prosper and thrive in the long term. And one way or the other, its destiny will be determined primarily by the Jews of Israel and the Jews of the world who want to participate in the Zionist enterprise. Its future will be determined largely with or without the American Reform Jews who don't want to be part of that. But what these arguments are about, these disputes, these disagreements, this even tension and growing animosity between the part of the Jewish community that is anti-Zionist and the vast majority that is still in the pro-Israel Zionist camp, is these discussions are more about us than about Israel. They're about how do you see American Judaism? How do we see our future? Do we want to be alienated from the majority of our people and marginalized? Because if we do that, we marginalize ourselves in Jewish history. We'll become a footnote in Jewish history, not a main player as we want to be.
Yeah, I think that last one, I'm hoping, let me say it this way, that concept, that conversation about the role of the American Jewish experience vis-a-vis the diaspora, vis-a-vis our relationship to Israel, will continue to be a major thrust of the conversations in May. Certainly some of the people you're bringing in would indicate that they're not going to ignore that at all, and I doubt you'll ignore it. But in conclusion, May 29th and 30th, detailed conference at Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. Registration information at the website again is
rechargingreform.com.
Rabbi Ammiel Hirsch, thank you very, very much for your time, your passion, and your love of our people in the state of Israel. And I wish you just happiness, most of all health, and lots of koch.
Thank you, Richie, and you keep up the good work too. I'll see you in May, right? You're planning on being with us.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I guess. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you to all of you. Thank you again for your time and for joining us today on today's edition of Secrets of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Any of you have ideas or suggestions or feedback, email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com. There's a little donate button there if you'd like to help out, and just follow the prompts. If you'd like to be a sponsor of some of these podcasts, again, just email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. A reminder that these podcasts are produced at the Media Center of Lubetkin Media in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a shout out to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Again, thank you for joining us. We are very, very grateful for your time. We look forward to seeing you on the next Secrets of Meaning. And in the meantime, please stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy. And most of all in this day and age, be kind to one another. Shalom. Todah.